I am Tina Reed, author of the Vitals newsletter again. Up here to chat with this great panel. I've got John Flavin, founder and CEO of Portal Innovations, Danielle Carnival, Deputy Assistant to the President for the Cancer Moonshot, and Raghu Kalluri, Principal Investigator at the Kalluri Lab at University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Thank you so much for being here. So I wanted to start off just diving right into the question that I think a lot of people are probably worried about and thinking about. Danielle, this one's for you. There's a new administration coming in. What is going to become of the Cancer Moonshot?
Yeah, there could be a long answer to that. I'll try to keep it short. I think the progress that we've made across the federal agencies is delivering for the American people. It's really hard to pull back things that are delivering for the American people, like protecting 100 million Americans from PFAS exposure, so-called forever chemicals that could cause cancer and other health conditions, covering for the first time through CMS and many private insurance for navigation services for anyone with a positive cancer screening all the way through treatment. And creating a brand new biomedical research agency in ARPA-H. These are really important steps forward that we've taken, and the fight against cancer has been bipartisan for decades. So I don't know that there'll be someone in my position in the White House. There wasn't in the first Trump administration, but the agency's mission kept going. More importantly, for this crowd here today, the Cancer Moonshot was never just a federal endeavor. It was setting a really bold goal of decreasing the death rate from cancer by at least 50% over 25 years and better supporting people through the experience, and then calling on everyone to do their part. We've had more than 200 companies, academic institutions, philanthropies, nonprofits, advocacy organizations step up and take actions against that goal, and that work is going to continue. I'm more confident in that after being in this room today than I was walking in.
And I'd love to hear the other perspectives on the panel in terms of, like, what are you feeling right now in terms of, are you feeling nervous about funding in the future? Are you feeling optimistic? I mean, can you talk a little bit about what could happen with this transition in the administration? I want to get the researcher perspective first.
Thank you. So I think that all of us tend to get a little more worried than we should when administrations change, but I think something like cancer is a disease that impacts everybody, and there's not a single person on this planet who's not impacted by this disease. So I think it's all about making sure that the mission is clearly stated to the new administration, and the fact that the struggle to find new strategies that can really help patients and find new therapies is a very common goal for everyone. So I think the challenge is always that you have a set of people who think a certain way, so you have to program yourself to explain to them how they should be invested in it. And then 4 years later, there might be a new set of people. Then you have to have a different strategy to convince them. It may not be the same strategy, but I think overall, in my career, I found that most of the administrations and politicians generally will listen to you when you talk about a health problem. And then the way you explain it to them in a way that they may understand it better because of their political leanings maybe, but generally you can get them to come back to really support what is really important. So I'm usually very optimistic, and really, if you look at the last 30 years, we have not lost our ability to continue to invest in fighting cancer.
And when you think about strategy and how you message or how you get across what you're working on, how might that change under an RFK-led HHS? And when we think about some of the other priorities of who else might come into leadership positions?
Me again?
You again.
Tough questions for me.
You take this.
Again, you know, I am a believer that you can sit down with RFK Jr. and explain to him how things need to be now. This is a large country with many different aspects of how healthcare should be provided to different segments. And so I, again, believe that there is political side to this conversation. There are certain opinions people have based on their personal experiences. But I think when they become leaders, in an administration like this. I truly believe that you can sit down with them and explain to them that there are multiple ways to look at a problem, and then maybe listen to them and learn something from what they're thinking, and provide a strategy of how their concerns can also be incorporated into a strategy. So I truly believe that this is possible, and as a scientist, as a physician scientist, I have to think like that. Otherwise, things can really go bad, and I personally believe that it can happen in a positive way.
I just want to add, I completely agree, and we have seen that over the course of transitions in the past. I think the only thing to pay really close attention to that would put that future more at risk is undermining science and evidence and ignoring science and evidence. And if that is the approach of a future HHS, that is much more concerning to me. But that has not been largely the case in the past. So I share the hope and optimism that things like fighting cancer, driving progress on cancer outcomes, preventing, treating, diagnosing it earlier and surviving it are bipartisan. They are personal to nearly every American, and it's something that we can come together on.
Yeah, if I had my chance to be in front of RFK Jr., I would show him the footage of his uncle John, who gave the Cancer Moonshot speech about 5 miles from here in the Rice Football Stadium, talking about how science and engineering will propel this country forward, and that we will put a person on the moon in that decade, which they did, as we know. And I think that, as Dr. Kalluri mentioned, I think that when people get into leadership positions and the gravity and the responsibility that comes with that, they have to have a holistic view. And like the others, my experience, there tends to be a lot of noise when an administration changes, and there's a lot of over-expectation around both to the positive and to the negative of what might happen. And the realities of what I've seen, so if you look back even in the first Trump administration, NIH funding actually went up during that phase. Some of the greatest breakthroughs in cancers happened, during that administration. Maybe not due to that, but it certainly wasn't impaired or stopped. So I think that we're in a country that is always propelling itself forward, and a new administration will have that same American spirit, with wind in their sails, thinking about the possibility and the import of cancer, and continuing to make it a priority. I just can't see how that would be deterred going forward, or immediately or abruptly even being stunted.
And specifically with the Cancer Moonshot, what did we see in the first Trump administration? How would you describe it?
Very active. I mean, if you look at kind of coming out of the Obama administration, where Vice President Biden, I had the chance to meet with Vice President Biden back at the University of Chicago when the Genomic Data Commons that was cited up here earlier today, Dr. Bob Grossman came out and put together the first database around 10,000 cancer patients, DNA. And now that's being built upon by companies like Tempus, and it's actually helping patients get better treatments. A lot of that came out of the first Cancer Moonshot that continued, that proliferated, that one could say that continuation has led to a much more robust sets of activity under the Trump administration that has led to now commercial successes that are building on that academic and government collaboration.
Yeah, and I think I will emphasize some of that continuity was really deliberate on our part before we left. The work that we were doing across the federal agencies, they set out a 2, 5, 10-year plan. All of the agencies, Craig and DOD and others across the administration, on what they were going to do with existing budget, with career folks in place, that is already mission critical to them. Like, this is built into the mission of these agencies to do some of this work. And then President Obama signed the 21st Century Cures Act, which did many things, but one of those was put a boost of $1.8 billion at NCI that just ended this last fiscal year. So there were things in place to really build that continuation, and we're doing the same today.
And from the researcher's perspective?
Again, so coming back to it, what we have seen, again, I've been doing this for 3 decades now, is that there's usually a bipartisan support for research especially for chronic diseases, including cancer, and also technology development. So what I have found is when I talk to some of the congressmen and others who met us, you need to explain to them why it's important, because that's a challenge, because they change, administrations change, and they like to hear again, why was this investment made? What are the benefits of it? And I've always found that even though you walk into the room thinking that they will not like this because it was started by a previous administration. Let's say there's more focus on a certain type of cancer therapy that was really pushed by one administration. You just have to explain to them the benefits of it and how it's a long-range, process. It's not something that can happen for 2-3 years. And so then they embrace it, and they will follow through in really making sure that the research funding is there. The one thing you have to explain to them, especially the new administration, and they'll listen to this aspect of it. If you want the United States to be number one in the world, leading in science and technology, that investment must be there. Okay, so make America great again is a great slogan, but keep America great again in science and technology. So you have to explain in a different way to inspire them that this is something that is an investment that's important to keep America on the number one place, bring in people from the world who are the best of the best that we can bring here, because the technology belongs to the United States, the intellectual property belongs to the United States. So these are the things you'll be amazed if you actually explain to them why that aspect of immigration is important. They certainly will embrace it. And so these are the ways that you have to really talk to the new administration and make sure that they understand that what's being done in the previous administration is sort of apolitical. There are some things that are apolitical, and you have to make sure that they appreciate that. And I think that I have seen the research funding go up in some areas during the previous Trump administration. And in fact, all of us agree that warp speed was a great concept in the way that it had to deploy the vaccines. We can criticize every aspect of any great idea, but in fact, it did do the greatest thing in the world to show how you can deploy something like that. And today, the mRNA vaccines could really change how we will deal with cancer and prevention of cancer. And I bet you in a decade from now, you'll have many mRNA vaccines dealing with cancer progression and prevention of malignant disease of cancer. So all of that originated from that massive effort, and the fact that billions of people took it with hardly any toxicity. We can argue about some issues exist, but billions have taken so quickly. That also gives you the confidence that you can deploy a vaccine like that against cancer very easily.
I was just going to build on that too and say that, remember, it's a continuum. So the seeds of investment that have been made under this administration and will continue forward, as we just heard, there's so much importance around what the markets do from here on forward. Remember that the government funding is a seed capital source, but what does private capital do? And that's really a function of where do we sit in the world? What's our economy doing? I'm bullish on where things are going with regards to investments happening in life sciences. And you look at interest rates coming down, the election's behind us. You have a clearer pathway where there's billions of dollars that have been raised by dedicated life sciences venture funds that have been sitting on the sidelines, that with an economy that's encouraging taking risks in a country that should be aiming to stay number one in this vital area of science. Those conditions are also complementary to the investments that have been made thanks to programs like the Moonshot and the NIH and ARPA-H. But we have to keep our eye on that ball as well, keeping an environment where entrepreneurs are rewarded for taking risks and bringing these life-saving treatments to patients at the end of that journey.
What is the legacy of the Cancer Moonshot going to be if we were to stop its funding today? What has it accomplished already?
Yeah, the good news is that the Cancer Moonshot itself was an office in the White House. We didn't have any funding, right? There was funding from the Cures Act for the NCI that has not been renewed by name, but the NCI budget, when many other institutes across NIH and federal research programs across the government are not going up NCI went up $4 billion over the last 4 years. So the good news is that it's not a funding question. It is a will, focus, and urgency question. And so I think I am confident that the folks that do the research and provide care for people are going to continue, and those who invest in it are going to continue to be pushing the ball forward. We don't have all of the tools we need. We don't today have all the tools we need to prevent, detect, and treat cancer to help us reach the goals that the president set. So that innovation needs to continue to happen. We created a brand new program that I hope will continue forward, the Cancer Moonshot Scholars Program, which invests in early career folks from institutions across the country, really seeding that stay in this field. There's interesting science, there's funding, you can make a career in this field and really change people's outcomes. So that gives me some hope. But there's the things that we have set in place, like I said again, are not easily moved back. They provide positive benefit for the American people. Cleaning up water pipes across this country, I don't know that that's something you pull the rug out from under and stop the momentum. Reimbursing for navigation services, which we're getting early data. They were just instituted at the beginning of this year. We're getting early data on improved outcomes, which had been shown in trials, but now out in the real world. Improved costs for those healthcare systems that are using them, a decrease by more than 80% of ER visits because you have someone to call to talk about this weird symptom. These are really things that are delivering for people across the country that I have full belief will continue going forward. Now, like I said, there may not be a Cancer Moonshot office or strategy and priority setting role like there was in this White House. There wasn't in Trump's first administration. But the work, as you said, didn't slow down because it's so built into what agencies already do, and the private sector efforts really accelerated. There was a movement that had been created, and I feel like that movement has only grown, and so there's too much momentum for folks to put the brakes on it.
If I can just add there. So the idea of something like a moonshot is really about galvanizing everybody to come together with different ideas and say, we have one goal now. Can we bring all our talent in and focus on that goal? And I think that you may not want to call it moonshot or something, but the concepts will remain because that's how science will evolve now to becoming successful. Individual ideas are very important, but then those ideas must be brought together in a concept like the moonshot. So a shout out to my institution, MD Anderson Cancer Center. That's where this local moonshot program began, actually. It's where the program started, where it was to galvanize our community to bring in scientists, physicians, study nurses, nurse practitioners, everybody, and say, let's have one goal here. Let's come up with a drug for pancreatic cancer that nobody else is thinking about. And I can tell you two examples. One is pancreatic cancer, where MD Anderson, from a discovery of an idea of targeting an oncogene to finishing of a phase 1 clinical trial, took 3 years and 4 months. That's really fast. But it took 85 colleagues across 17 departments to leave all their barriers and all their silos away and work together. The other is CAR-NK strategy. You've heard of this CAR-NK strategy like CAR-Ts. Again, that came through our moonshot programs. So this is something that locally we benefited quite a bit. And that's the idea that at that time Vice President Biden took it and said, let's make a national program. So I think this is going to live. I think it'll thrive. It may not be called moonshot maybe, but it'll always live as a concept.
And what's so exciting, you're talking about the science that has developed over the last decades. The impact that we've seen in driving down the death rate from cancer over the last 30 years, which is by 30%, was mostly driven by prevention and early detection, right? Like the innovations years prior to that in understanding what's driving cancer and how to detect cancers earlier paid dividends over the last 30 years. We've had an explosion of scientific understanding, drug development for new treatments that we are not seeing the benefits of. We're seeing it in small populations, really incredible, right? Lives changed, lives saved. But the explosion of that now making a difference on large populations, on replacing traditional therapies, improving outcomes, we're just starting to see. So I have no doubt that if we continue on this path, we will reach that goal, which will save 4 million American lives from dying from cancer by 2047.
So for John, I have to say this, that these moonshot programs at MD Anderson that I just mentioned to you, many of them led to new intellectual property and led to licensing, formation of new companies. So all of this is built in together. You know, there's great science when you do leads to translation. That leads to clinical utility and then leads to intellectual property. So I think the Cancer Moonshot programs also have to be seen that they're innovating with new intellectual property.
Yeah, and Moonshot is not one single funding source, right? I mean, even if you go back to the original Moonshot in space exploration, it was the jumpstart that the government provided to create NASA, but it opened up a brand new industry of risk takers and companies, Boeing and others, that were making rockets, creating thousands of jobs. So Moonshot is bigger than any one funding source or one office. Again, this is America. And in America, markets drive success. And what has been done in this continuum, the moonshot's already begun. It's underway. This room is empowered with taking it to the next level. And there's nothing stopping this room. There's no government agency, there's no individual that's going to be able to stop the momentum that's already been created because of the import of closing in on cancer and making a difference in patients' lives with new tools that, frankly, because of those investments, we now have at our disposal to be able to conceive that, just like imagining that you could put a person on the moon in that decade. I mean, it seemed impossible. So it sounds impossible to be able to reduce that death rate by 2047 with those ambitions, but not so much, because the tools and the infrastructure and the investments and the risk-taking that's already underway that won't be stopped, I think will have surprisingly positive results. I think we have to work with even greater urgency to even shorten that time frame and hit the goal faster.
So I would travel around with then Vice President Biden in 2016 in the months after the Cancer Moonshot was launched. And at every table, at every meeting, he said, I wish we didn't call it Moonshot. I'm like, sir, there's a logo behind you. We've licensed the trademark from MD Anderson. Like, it is a moonshot. But the reason he would say that is because the misunderstanding that we thought that this was an engineering problem. And I think that comes from many people thinking about the original moonshot as solving engineering and physics challenges and overcoming that to reach the moon. But the reason that the image worked is because it's about bringing forward that hope and urgency and really galvanizing people around a big goal. And from the beginning, to make it even more ambitious, the now president, would always say, and it's not just about cancer. He did a Cancer Moonshot because that was their personal experience, and they learned a lot about how much opportunity there was to improve outcomes and improve the process and improve how people were supported or not through cancer treatment. But it was about showing that it was possible and expanding that to other diseases and expanding it to other parts of government. This is kind of showing, getting back to this is America. This is about showing what's truly possible when people come together around a goal and drive and don't let anything stop them from achieving it. And so I think because that's so part of our nature and who we are as a society, I think that will drive it forward.
I don't think you made a mistake, because if you think about the concept of moonshot.
Thank you. I'll have you tell him.
Absolutely, anytime. But the reason is that it's our engineering colleagues, it's our mathematicians, it's our physicist colleagues who are going to help us cure cancer also. Because cancer is no more a biology problem. In fact, a lot of the innovations that are coming in detection, all of the devices that are being invented for prevention, everything. So I would say that you had the vision that it is an engineering problem, a physics problem, a math problem, and they should work with a biologist to make it happen. So I still think that's a great name.
And on the access side, it's a sociology and a psychology challenge, right? Like, how do we reach more people? How do we reach them where we are? How do we talk to people about prevention and early detection in ways that feel important in the moment and not far off into the future so that we can prevent cancer even before it starts. We have so many more innovations today that allow that to happen.
Well, and I'm curious if there's any piece of this, though, that you're worried might fall by the wayside as we get further and further away from the end of the Biden administration. In particular, what I'm thinking about is that other piece of the moonshot goal, which is to change the experience that patients and their families have with cancer. Can you talk a little bit about that? What's the lasting legacy of that piece?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest part of supporting people going through a cancer diagnosis is that they have health insurance. So more Americans have health insurance today under President Biden than in the history of the country. If that changes, this goal is going to be harder to achieve. The navigation support I was talking about is because of insurance coverage. The no-cost access to recommended cancer screenings is because of insurance coverage and specific conditions in the Affordable Care Act. So I think that part of the problem gets much more difficult. We are going to increase inequities in outcomes. People are going to die of cancers that they don't have to die of if we decrease people's access to health insurance and the quality of the health insurance that they have.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that too is I just think there's a greater awareness of survivorship. So the benefits of the investments that were made in innovation around prevention and therapeutics and treatment, people are living longer. You know, we're seeing cancer affect patients younger in their lifespan, and they're living longer. So the focus around survivorship, I see that as a market activity right now too. So there's a lot of activity around companies that are addressing that problem thanks to the innovations that have happened, but the downside of living with and beyond cancer are manifold. And so I see, just from the market perspective, a whole swath of companies that are rising up to address that part of the problem because there's a market opportunity. Insurers will pay for it. There are payers that will say, we need that support because there's a burden on the healthcare system if we're not addressing these survivorship issues that are coming into play. So that'd be the one thing I'd be looking at is, can that continue on? And from the market perspective on, I believe that that will continue to be addressed because there's a problem to be solved. And for those that can solve the problem, there's a way to be paid for your innovation.
Can you think of any examples just off the top of your head? That's interesting.
Well, I mean, companies that are addressing this, you know, even at the level of, you know, thinking about in the Portal portfolio, you know, we've got 74 companies across each of our 4 locations. A big group is working on therapeutics. A subset is working on diagnostics. You heard from Artitis earlier today and what they're doing. So prevention is a big factor. But the inbounds that we get from companies and entrepreneurs that are looking to solve the problem around survivorship, I see going up dramatically. So deal flow and the kinds of things that we're looking at that could be part of our portfolio moving forward, I'm very bullish on those types of companies that are presenting to us.
And I think part of it is changing a person who has survived cancer, their health care approach should be altered. And we kind of haven't caught up. So innovations that look at really targeted, evidence-based secondary screenings, or screenings for secondary cancer, people looking at how to do the psychological support around people who've survived cancer. I think there's a lot of pieces there that the health system as a whole has to get better on, and innovations that really pick up that piece are going to make a huge difference. Because right now, people too often get dropped back in to their primary care doc who may not know the specifics of the treatment that they received, or their risk of secondary cancers or other health impacts. So tightening that gap and giving a much more supportive experience for someone moving beyond cancer, I think, is a huge opportunity.
And more is becoming known about the impacts of chemotherapeutic agents as people live longer, and there are more solutions being developed. And it's not all, you know, mental health advances in innovation, it's also dietary health. I mean, we have a company that's very focused on a prebiotic that could be very effective in helping cancer patients that have gone through treatment, but their immune system, their dietary and GI system needs rebalancing. And so companies are innovating around that space as well.
And we haven't even really gotten into a lot of some where is the puck going when it comes to cancer research? Where should we be watching next? So I'm not sure which one of you do you want to jump in on that first?
Sure. I think that one of the most important things that needs to happen to make advances, towards, combating cancer is investing in basic fundamental discovery research. And these are things you can never predict. So one has to ask the question, why is a cell suddenly trying to become a cancer cell? What is its mission? How is that cell living there in that tissue and the body not getting rid of it? What are the things we can do to get rid of it before it becomes dangerous to us? So a lot of these things might sound interesting at a very basic level, but they require deep science. And that science will then lead to research and that lead to translation and clinical benefit. So I would say, if I were to think about what's the next decade that we should be focusing on, of course, immunotherapy is going to still be around, and we still need to learn a lot more about how to shore up our immune system so it can get rid of these renegade cells. And I think there's a way to do that, and especially vaccines, again, might be important. The other areas is to how do we perfect technology so we can then, I dream about the Star Trek in the 60s where you could zap a little thing and you find stuff, right? But we have come a long way in the sort of detection method. So detecting lesions early on is going to be a great value. So technology, physics, mathematicians, engineers must come together to do that. The other important thing is to finally decide that we're not going to take poisons to cure cancer. We're not going to be having people do that, and people will not do it. So we have to come up with strategies where the therapies become more manageable and in a way that they're not as toxic. And that's happening again. The best thing I think will happen is that, and this is something that's my real obsession right now, is that walking around on this planet are about 1 billion people with cancer cells in them. Many of them will never, ever see them grow tumors and become a disease that impacts them. So why are they living their lifespan out without ever that becoming a disease of cancer? Because some do, and that's the unfortunate 26 million that come into our hospital all over the world with the disease of cancer. So I think that understanding what keeps cancer in check in most of us and not become malignant disease or lethal disease, and why in some people it happens, could be a way for prevention of the disease of cancer. And that could be a great way for people to live their lifespan out. Comes back to what both of you said, is that we're going to live longer. We should be living healthy. When we live healthy, we would like to keep these diseases at bay. And I think all of this comes together. For me, healthy living, aging, and cancer are all connected. And so I think preventing the disease of cancer happening to us and living our lifespan out, and maybe it'll happen at 125, we won't live that long, then you live your lifespan out without ever seeing the disease of cancer. That's how we're going to combat cancer. And that's where you have immunology, genetics, environmental sciences, to disparity research. All of this will have an impact because you need to then improve the lifespan of an individual without having to get the disease of cancer.
Two challenges / opportunities in the future in cancer. One is, as we understand more about these diseases, a growing number of cancers are actually rare diseases, right? When we get very specific about the biology of them and the genetics of them. And so then those development programs, drug development and drug research pipelines fall victim to all of the challenges that rare diseases have faced over the years. And so we're going to have to come up with solutions on how we can invest from the federal government side and from the private sector side and really drive progress against these cancers that are increasingly rare. And then the other part, to get to the healthy living aspect, American health outcomes, I think, are unacceptable today, right? And we're not going in a positive direction. Our life expectancy was going down before the pandemic, especially as compared to all other wealthy nations, and we have rebounded far more slowly. that has an overall impact on people's health and health outcomes, but it has a huge impact on cancer. The biggest threat in my mind to achieving the goals of the Cancer Moonshot is if our cancer rates spike because of overall health issues and obesity and diabetes that we know contribute to increases in cancer. I think that is the biggest threat. So I hope that the future of cancer research and the fight against cancer addresses that head on in ways that can make a difference for people.
Yeah, and just building on that, I think, I remain very confident and bullish on the utilization of computational biology, predictive analytics, AI, and its ability to have a longitudinal measurement and early diagnosis pre-cancer, pre-disease, so that patients have a better view toward their journey, their health journey, and how best to have a comprehensive approach toward preventative care, their diets, the way that they behave, mental support, all of those kinds of things, all kind of track toward, how are we using information, diagnostic tools, to predict mutations that will lead to some type of deleterious, illness down the road, including cancer. And on the therapeutic side, agents like antibody drug conjugates that are minimizing that poisonous element by having an antibody that goes directly to the drug target, but minimizing that systemic exposure of the chemotherapeutic agent for that patient that understands their genetic profile because of the predictive analytic tools that we have earlier in life, might be an ambitious way to think about how we'll see that death rate come down as well. It's the utilization of all, we've kind of said the same things, it's the utilization of a healthy lifestyle, but with information, and with that information, knowing how best to, attack that target at the right point in that patient's life.
Coming back to the point you were making about healthy living and how in different communities that's a different thing. So I always thought that cancer in an individual is a rare cancer of their own. That's their own cancer. So no cancer is the same as the other. So a person with diabetes getting pancreatic cancer in Brownsville is a different disease than a person getting pancreatic cancer in River Oaks, because their lifestyle is different, their diet is different, their microbiome is different, and their entire way of living is different. So the disease is same at the basic level. So if you now target that with a drug, you may get benefit on both sides, but then one will escape because there are other factors that will regulate how the cancer evolves and the drug is not working. So I personally think that we need to do all of the other things when a cancer diagnosis happens to make sure that they're doing things in a manner that will not make that so different than another person, and that's when trials will work. Because we cannot do individual trials. We have to have cohort trials. But we have to appreciate that each individual in those trials is different, and then really understand how to impact that. So I would believe that people in Brownsville who have more diabetes getting pancreatic cancer, you need to focus there, how to educate them about how to deal with that risk factor, whereas another community is something else. So I think we have to be at the community level. And then doing that at the level that John was saying will have a huge impact on how the drugs that are coming up will work. Otherwise, we'll see these variations. That's why any clinical trial, you'll see these curves going like this, and that tells you heterogeneity already, right? And so to really understand that cancer is a disease that gets impacted by how you live, what you eat, in the environment, the local ecosystem, the social life even. All of these things have an impact.
I'm curious, just thinking about some of the macro trends that I've been covering. GLP-1s have been dominating, obviously, conversations in healthcare. How does that potentially play a role in cancer and in cancer outcomes if we see a number of people improving their metabolic health?
Well, I think it's had a huge impact. In fact, you'll start seeing in the next few years the impact on liver cancer and other gastric cancers, et cetera. And I think that the trials are being done and people are being followed. retrospectively and prospective studies are going on. I think there's no doubt that if you control your diabetes, let's start like that, and then that has an impact on weight loss, or people just using for weight loss itself are having a huge impact. The question will be that how long will that be sustained? Because cancer is not a disease that you can just say, I'll do it for 2 years and it'll be fine. It's a matter of 2 decades or 3 decades. So you have to have a certain discipline about this. But also we're learning that the bodies have some epigenetic memory. There's some memories in the cells. And that takes a long time to get erased. And so all of these will come to bear very soon. But I would say that the drugs against diabetes and obesity will have a huge impact on cancer, and it's being seen already a little bit.
Agreed. And I guess maybe just taking a little different view or looking through a different aperture from an investment perspective, absolutely there's a lot of emphasis and investment being made in GLP-1 agonists or next generation drugs that are working perhaps with alternative mechanisms. But at the end of the day, it's all these comorbidities that we're talking about here, cancer being one of the most primary. And so there's no question that, by investing in that area, cardiometabolics in particular, people are seeing that as a market opportunity. There's innovation that's moving into uncharted territories for next generation. And its collateral impact in a positive way on things like cancer will only work to the benefit of the moonshot as well.
So we're coming up on time. At Axios, we always like to try to end on one fun thing that people can chew on. I wanted to ask you each, what's one thing you do in your personal life to reduce your cancer risk? And I can start. I just got a skin cancer screening for the first time the other day, so that was a good thing. John, do you want to go next?
I spend time with my family. By being with my family, they take stress off of me, and I think that relief in a sustained way allows me to lead a healthy life.
That's a good one.
I'm going to say two. One is I just last week got my biannual breast cancer screening. So there's nothing better than walking out and getting a clean bill of health from what they can detect by that screening. So I recommend it for everyone, for those that apply to you. And the second thing is running, because it's a healthy vice that alleviates stress rather than all of the other vices.
Amen. All right.
I think family is number one. Having a very healthy family environment helps. For me personally, it's been to meet people randomly. Not people that I generally would meet, but just go to places, meet people randomly, listen to their stories. And it really inspires me every day of what people are doing on a daily basis that I would not meet them in my regular work environment. And it's interesting because you learn so many things. I've learned to be more healthy based on some things that others were doing that I didn't think would work for me, to just having random conversations with people and learning about what people are doing can have an impact on you and your psyche and in the way you think and how you think yourself as something much more than the little ecosystem that you're always in, but you are part of a huge humanity here. And I think those things will somehow influence you to want to live better, do better, and hopefully put cancer as a disease at check. I can tell you I probably have some mutations. Hopefully they'll sit there quietly and let me live my lifespan out.
Can I just say, before we close, thank you to Portal for bringing this together. I know I'm leaving more energized. I know research and clinical care can be a slog. DC can be a slog. So being in this room with all of you has really given me energy and hope that we're going to keep pushing forward. So thank you. Thank you to Portal.
Thanks for the collaboration.
Well, thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it. And let's give a round of applause for our panel.